Um, so as we get started and I go through this LinkedIn Live today talking about should you pursue prime or subcontracting, I want to talk to you about determining your current situation and what you should do based on that situation. So an example of the situations I'm going to discuss today are maybe you're not making any revenue at all, $0, or maybe you're making zero federal dollars, federal revenue. Maybe you're making federal revenue, but it's less than 3 million. And the last two is if this is you, you're making between $3 and $10 million federal revenue, or you're making greater than $10 million in federal revenue. I'm going to talk about those scenarios and give you my one recommendation of where you should be proceeding. Obviously you can do multiple things, but I just want to say, here's one thing you should absolutely be doing. It should be without me having other information about your company. It's the number one thing I would recommend for you in that scenario. Before I do, though, I wanted to back up a little bit and talk about federal dollars and make sure we're all on the same page of both where federal dollars come from and why I recommend certain things. So when you think about making federal market dollars, you can make it from three particular ways that I described. You can make it from small business subcontracting, large prime subcontracting, and then prime contracting. That's with an agency. So small business, you typically are looking at $5 to $10 million, $5 to $20 million companies that you subcontract under. Large prime contracting, even though that is companies in the $50 to $200 million range, I'm really talking about 200 and north, even $1 billion north. That's a whole nother revenue stream, if you will. And then the third revenue stream you should be focused on is obviously prime contracts and agency. When you do each of those is the topic for today that we're talking about. So when I look at the sales life cycle, how hard is it to begin to knock on doors, sell, and try to get revenue? Small business subcontracting is the absolute easiest, right? It's the you knock on a door, you meet the owner or maybe somebody who's doing the head of sales in there, and you're off to the races. If it's a fit, it's a fit, and you move forward in almost sometimes the single day. As you move forward in the sales cycle, going into a large prime contractor, the sales cycle into them is fairly easy. It's not as easy as smalls, but it is still fairly easy. If you've got something they value, then you'll be able to develop the relationship and get in the door. And then last one is prime contracting with an agency. And when you do that, that is the hardest sales cycle because it begins with business development, trying to understand the agency, trying to identify opportunities that are fits for your company. And then when you identify an opportunity, it's about chasing down that opportunity to give you the best chance of winning it when you write a proposal. So it's a long sales cycle to get in and a lot of activity where when you subcontract, far less activity, especially since you're not leading the sales cycle. The next thing is how complex is it to get into small, large, and primes? When you think about the complexity of working with these three different channels of revenue, let's call them mini markets within the federal market, there's almost no complexity at all. When you work with a small business under $10 million, let's say, and you're trying to team up to subcontract, if you can bring a skill set that they would value as they go after opportunities, pretty much you're getting an NDA in place and you're off to the races. If there's an opportunity you identify, you might put a teaming agreement in place. But it's not like either one of you have these big complex legal teams that will be complicating the matters. You're getting in, you're getting out. They're focused more on, can you help us go after opportunities? And sometimes it truly is just, do we feel like there's a chemistry? And one thing about small business teaming that I love is that it's so much easier to build strategic partnerships at the company level. Both companies want to achieve or help each other achieve success. When you do it with a large prime like Lockheed, never will you have that. Never, never, never. There might be an individual at Lockheed who's committed to you, likes you, wants to work with you, but that person could switch jobs. That person could switch companies. The company itself has got its own mission and it only focuses on shareholders. But small businesses, they understand what it's like to be in your position. And so you have a much tighter relationship company to company. Not talking about people to people, just company to company. So anyways, the complexity is very low when you're building a relationship and you're starting to work with small businesses. When you move into the large businesses and you're doing subcontracting with larges, the complexity goes up. In here, there's a much larger compliance level checklist that they run through, right? Depending on what levels you go into. I did a webinar panel interview with large primes. You can find on the GovCon Chamber. You find in multiple spots, but it's on the GovCon Chamber website. Actually, I think if you go to my LinkedIn profile, since we're all on LinkedIn, if you go to my LinkedIn profile, it's one of the featured videos in my profile. So as you just come down a little bit on my profile, you'll see featured, and in there is this interview with 4 or 5 large prime contractors, and they're talking about the complexity of working with them. They want to work with smalls, but they're really focused on, do you have your I's dotted and your T's crossed? Are you financially stable? What they don't want is for you to get on a team, them to start working on a project, and you don't have the money to pay your people, and then your people are quitting or whatever it is, right? There's all this complexity. When you go to get on their teams, there's an increased scrutiny of your company. They look at you, and this goes into a next topic I'm going to talk about is risk averse, but they have a much more stringent review from a legal standpoint, from an accounting or financial standpoint. They want to make sure as they're teaming up with firms like yours that you're not going to increase the risk, you're going to decrease it. So let me bring you to the last bullet I want to talk about just as it relates to small, large, and primes. Smalls are willing to take risks. I'll just leave it at that. Basically, smalls are not risk averse. The very fact that they've started a company means they're risk comfortable. I don't know the right way to say that, right? But we entrepreneurs who go off and start a company, we're comfortable with risk. We manage risk. We know there's a risk involved. But as you move into a large prime, they're risk averse. They're customer focused. So anytime they're looking at you as a potential teammate, they're wondering multiple things. But basically, are you going to make it easier for us to serve our customers who are dealing with a mission, or are you going to make it harder for us? An example of risk that they're concerned about is your ability to recruit, right? They don't want to put you on a team, have you commit to a certain set of talent or people on a project, only to find out you have no idea how to hire these people or find them, or you're looking to them to do that work for you and then put them on your contract, which happens, right? So they're really concerned about that for 2 reasons. One is you would just make them have to do double the work, but the other is they were counting on you to fill certain roles to meet the customer needs. If you're not doing that, they're letting their customer down. So they're very conscious about that. They're very conscious, I mentioned, about your ability to actually do the work. So if you're saying that you can do, you're the best at elevators and you can come in, well, if they've got a project to build out a new hospital in Hampton, Virginia, or whatever for the Department of Veterans Affairs, and they say, look, you got the elevator part of it. What they don't need is somebody coming in, building an elevator that when it goes up, it falls. When it goes up, it falls, right? Bad elevator process or bad elevator performance. And so what they want to know is that you're the best at elevators, as an example, right? That you believe in the quality. You measure 10 times, cut once, kind of a thing. If you're familiar with that idea of measure, then make your cut. And so when I say they're risk averse, from their perspective, primarily it's about customers. We need to serve the customers. We need to make sure our subcontractors are only going to do things that enable us to do that, enhance our capability of delivering to the customer. And that brings me to the last bullet I want to talk about from this circle, if you will, of small, large, and prime on the risk aversion. No one is more risk averse than the federal government. So if you're looking to prime in there, you have got to know that they are risk averse because they have a mission to solve. I use the VA as an example. Their mission is not to build a new hospital. Their mission is not to have elevators that go up and down, although that's a good thing to have in place. Their mission is to serve the veterans of this country, to make sure they get the best health care they need, or if they're doing Veterans Benefit Administration, that they're being served the best benefits in the fastest way, kind of thing. So they're serving that veteran. The FBI and other law enforcement agencies, their mission is about the agents who are out doing the job. And in DOD, it's about the soldiers, airmen, and sailors who are downrange doing whatever it is to protect and defend and I almost said attack, but that might not be the right word, but protect and defend this country, right? And so agencies have a mission. They need to know if they're going to give you a prime contract, that you will be able to do that contract flawlessly. And excuse me. And if you listen to me talk about CPARs the other day, flawless doesn't mean not having a problem. Flawless means your ability to execute perfectly. And if a problem arises, you solve it rapidly, right? Problems come up sometimes. They want to know you're able to solve problems and you're able to deliver what you said you were going to deliver in support of their mission. So, when you think about these three entities, keep these things in mind that I just mentioned as it relates to small, large, and prime customers. In your case, if you're subcontracting or you're going to do a prime contract, all three of these entities are your subcontractor. Just looking over, see if there's any questions as I take a sip of water, and I'm going to move on to the next. If you have questions, by the way, feel free to put something in. If you know of anybody else who might value hearing about, should you pursue prime or subcontracting, drop their name in the comments or just give it a thumbs up. Okay, so let's talk about your current situation. I want you to determine your current situation. I'm going to say these 5 bullets again and think about it. And maybe in the comments, you could actually tell me which one you're at. And all of us have been I guess not all of us have been over 10 million, but all of us have been in any of the early stages that I'm going to talk about. So stage 1 is you're not making any money anywhere with this company that you're in, whether it's your company or you're working for it. There's no revenue coming in from anywhere. That's one position. All of us have been there. The second one is no federal revenue. So maybe you're doing some commercial, state, and local, but you're not doing any federal revenue. We had somebody yesterday on who was saying exactly that they're pursuing their first federal. They've done commercial and state. The next one is you're making less than 3 million federal revenue. And so if you've heard me before, you might have heard me say that I like to recommend that you do not prime contract that. Excuse me. Sorry. At an agency, you don't prime contract at an agency until you're making 3 million or you've been in the federal space 3 years, whichever is longer. And it's funny because 3 years could seem like a long time, but it really is not. There's a lot of people who come in and they're in for 8 years, 10 years or longer, and they're really still not making a lot of money. Well, if you took the first 3 years and said, I'm going to do the very basics and develop the very basic skills, when you do come out of that, you'd be ready to start growing. 8As are a perfect example. Spend the time it takes to get $3 million in revenue from a federal agency, then get your 8A. Now your 9-year 8A window is coming with a strong foundation. Anyways, I digress. So you're making less than 3 million in federal revenue, or maybe this is your scenario. You're making between 3 and 10 million, and you feel like you got some pretty good traction, but maybe you're not focused in any particular agency. You're working with multiple customers. And the last one is I have tips for you as well. If you're a company that's making 10 million or more, and at this point, it doesn't really matter because it begins to become a government contracting is not a secret. It's just a process. It becomes this process of how do I make 100,000 over and over and over again? How do I make $1 million over and over and over again? If I want to grow to 100 million, how do I make 10 million over and over and over again? Don't be aiming for 100 million if you haven't made 100,000. Know that you will get there if you put the effort and time into it, but you got to work through these steps. It's just, business, right? So let me talk about some suggestions on those 5 scenarios. And if you're feeling comfortable, let me know where you're at on your current situation. Okay, so you're not making any revenue. What should you do? The first thing I would say, and I'm trying to give you just one tip about where do you go get money, but if I have a comment, I want to throw it in there. And so the first thing that I want you to do is if you're not making any revenue anywhere, stop for a second and go, what are you the very best at? If you're not making any revenue, there's a good chance it's just you and maybe 2 other people who are willing to be in a company that's not making revenue. And again, many of us have been there. But what are you best at? Not what are the things you could do. Big difference. Not what can you do. What are you best at? And so if it's artificial intelligence and machine learning, then that's it. Determine it. If it's data analytics, that's it. Determine the one thing you're good at. If you're not making any money, imagine you were going to get a job. I'm going to go look for a job as an AI ML engineer or developer or manager or whatever. When you have that one thing, it allows you to communicate. You can watch other videos I've done on this whole topic, but determine the one thing you're great at. Now, excuse me, go get a job with a small business doing that. And when I say get a job, I mean go get a subcontract as a 1099 person under that other company where you can be supporting their customers. So whether it's existing customers that they might be able to get you on, or whether it's new opportunities, identify, and I don't want to go too far into this, right? Because I have a whole nother video about how do you do this? How do you find subcontract opportunities, et cetera. But in here, what I mean is just go find one opportunity under a small business, 20 million or less, small business that is in your space or somehow related to it. When you do that, you will start finding success. And the point of making this recommendation is I very much am saying, do not go to the agencies. Do not go to large prime contractors. They're risk averse. You have no idea, respectfully, what you're doing in the federal space yet. When you go to a small, they will ramp you up. They'll teach you how to charge the government. They'll teach you about labor categories and rates. They'll teach you and help you get facility clearances if those are necessary. They'll teach you how to write winning proposals. So when you do start priming, you'll be able to go that direction. They'll give you past performance that will then lend to your relationships with larges. So hopefully that makes sense. So, and I'm looking now, watching the time, make sure I'm kind of on track. Okay, so next I'm coming to my no federal revenue. So you're making revenue somewhere, but you have no federal revenue. And I want to use a company as an example. I know they're making commercial and state and local revenue, but they're not making federal revenue, excuse me, yet, and they want to move forward. And so my recommendation to them is pretty similar to the first one. Go identify small businesses that you can subcontract under. In this case, you have a huge advantage because you're not just bringing skills, you're bringing past performance that's in the commercial side. It can still be used, right? And but when you team up with these companies, these are the companies that are going after the $2 to $10 million opportunities. And I'm in the service and construction side of the house, not products here. But when you identify a small business prime, and again, there's videos I have that tell you how to do that. How do I find them, et cetera. You will be able to find a company that does complementary services that will value your commercial experience coming in. And so that's my recommendation. If you're not making federal revenue, of these three tracks, you want to be on the small track. Small business subcontracting is where you want to be. One caveat, excuse me, especially in this example, because I know this particular company has a strong relationship with Northrop Grumman. If I was in that company as part of the leadership team, I would be doing everything I could to get additional business with Northrop Grumman, multi-billion-dollar company, top 10 government contractor. I know that this company is doing business with them commercially. They have not only established themselves as a company with past performance, but they have done it in Northrop Grumman's house, right? And so the ability to go to somebody on the federal side and say, yeah, we're doing it here. Go talk to them. They will give you references. Oh, I don't have to talk to them. I know them. I can look internally to maybe Northrop Grumman's reviewing or CPARS-like tools, and maybe I can see how you're doing. But don't go knock on other people's doors if you already have a solid relationship with a vendor that could get you federal revenue. Remember, this category here is you don't have any federal revenue. So Northrop Grumman obviously can get you in that direction. Many of the companies, if you're working with them on the commercial side, just look in and see, do they have a federal presence as well? If they do, start knocking on their door to get on a subcontract that they might have. Their federal people might just be waiting to hear from you. It's like, oh my God, that's awesome. Because, we're risk averse. So it's great to be able to work with a company that actually is already working with our commercial arm. So that was for people and companies that are making no federal revenue, but you're making state and local or commercial money. So the next scenario is when you're making less, excuse me, less than 3 million federal revenue, but you're starting to make money, you're starting to win. Maybe you got $1 million, $2 million in contracts that are out there. Often what I see is when people have those type of that type of revenue coming in, early revenue, that it's spread across multiple agencies. This is in particular, a weakness with the 8A program is that both the success comes with pros and cons, right? The pros is success and money. But the cons is sometimes people will start taking you in different directions than where you're really planning. And so you'll be at different agencies. And other small businesses without the 8A certification also sometimes run into that. We're at, DOJ, we're at education. Maybe we got a small contract at the Army. It's because we're just kind of bouncing anywhere anybody will take us. Well, if you're making federal revenue but less than 3 million, my next step for you is to focus singularly. That was a hard word for me, apparently, but focus very tightly on one agency and pursue now not just small, but small and large agents or contractors, prime contractors that are doing revenue there. Focus on identifying companies you can work with in that one agency. So let's say, for example, you really want to get into TSA and you think that you got some work there, but you also are doing work at education and DOJ or something. Well, turn over, look at TSA and go, you know what? That's where I determined we want to grow a business. We want to go from less than 3 million to, let's say, 6 million, just double that whole mass there. And we're going to do it in TSA. And we know that they have the money spending to be able to accommodate that goal of ours. Get in there and identify large primes that are in there and small businesses that are in there and reach out to them. Start building a relationship. I just did a webinar on Tuesday and the replay is available till tonight. And tonight I'll cut off the replay, but it's about how do I start and build relationships. So it's only an hour. Go watch it before it goes. It's free and you can learn about starting and building relationships if that's helpful to you. But anyways, so if you're making less than 3 million, the goal really is to focus now on an agency because you want to get as many past performances in a single agency, and that agency can get bigger and bigger as you go. So if you think about the Navy, you would start at Naval Surface Warfare Center Crane, then you would expand to NAVC, which is its parent upper head command. And then from NAVC, you would go, okay, now I'm going to look at the whole Navy. So you got a lot of room to grow. TSA is the same way. TSA, you can expand up into DHS, which is huge. But focus on an agency because it's so much easier for people in that agency to relate what you do to what they need and see how you understand their agency or their department. So the next one is 3 to 10 million. If you're doing 3 to 10 million, you're ready to do prime contracts. And if you haven't done prime contracts, then start doing it because you want to start getting experience now before somehow you get lucky and you grow too fast and you haven't got enough experience. But here's my recommendation. Work with the agency, the one agency approach again. But in this case, look to your existing teaming partners and say, hey, I'm going to go after a couple of primes. Would you be open to teaming with me? If you're teaming with small and larges, then you'll find a woman-owned business that you might have built a relationship with that says, sure, let's go after that SDVO. You're SDVO, we'll sub under you. Or maybe you've got CACI, CACI saying, sure, we've worked before, let's work together. But in the $3 to $10 million range, you want to tighten on an agency. You don't want to be everywhere. I've said this a lot of times, and I like telling this one story about a friend of mine who's got a $100 million company doing one core competency in one sub-component of HHS, right? He has just spent 20 years building up his past performance, the trust in that agency that he's able to win over and over again, not so much because they like him, but because he knows that agency. He has past performance and he brings a skill that they really need. And that's why I encourage you to pursue one agency. So the last one is greater than 10 million in revenue. If you're making greater than 10 million in revenue, my recommendation is very similar to what I just said, except for in this case, it's only go after one agency per salesperson. So a business developer or capture person. Don't give one business developer, the Air Force and the Army as an example. It doesn't make sense. You could build a $100 million company over the years in the Air Force. Have a person dedicated to the Air Force. And then when you can afford it, hire another person and say, okay, you've got the Army or HHS, whatever it is, right? As you grow and you're bringing on salespeople, dedicate them to a certain agency because it'll allow them to continue to grow or have success based on mini successes, but it'll also allow you to easily measure them because they won't constantly be having, oh, I had this great meeting over here. Oh, I had this great meeting over here. It's like you don't want great meetings. You want successful meetings that move the sale forward. And so in a single agency, that's understanding the agency. That's identifying opportunities. That's pursuing a single opportunity to capture and proposal and perhaps win, right? And so it's just a tip in here to make sure you never double up a salesperson on more than one agency. Give them one agency and say, that's what I'm measuring you on. And then, of course, if you're doing greater than 10 million, go after all three. And this is important. Don't just look at priming or large. Don't forget the small business teaming partners. Some of those teaming partners could be bringing in $1 million extra a year for you. If you have some good relationships, then you're going to be building some pretty good opportunity or pipeline opportunities. I'll give you one last example. Stars 3 is a $50 billion IT contract vehicle, and it's for 8A stars or 8A companies. They're small businesses. So if you're able to get on one of their teams, you could potentially get a piece of that huge pie. And so, and it's all potential, right? But being able to get on that vehicle requires you to have a relationship with that 8A. And so that's why I say if you're larger than 10 million, make sure you have a strategic plan that says, here's how we're getting small revenue, here's how we're getting large revenue, and here's how we're getting prime contractor revenue. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up. Excuse me, we're getting pretty close. Just looking to see if there's questions in here. Looks like we cover both sides of the same coin. I think it's just a couple of people in here. If you have any questions about what I talked about, just let me know. If you've found value in today's thing, give it a thumbs up, please. And then remember, government contracting, it's not a secret. It's just a process. Part of the process is us taking the weekend off. I'll see you next time.